Ukraine, regardless of who the next presidential administration, prime ministerial, the next Rada, Ukraine has to concentrate as a nation on development. And because economics is my field, I'll tend to talk most about that. A lot of positive stuff. Just recently, within the last year, Ukraine and the EU committed, in principle, I guess we should say, to a 10 or 12 year, $60 billion infrastructure development program. And this covers everything. It's transportation in that regard, but it's roads and rail and bridges and ports and airports. And here's what's good about that. Infrastructure development is a very democratizing development for any country. You know, if Ukraine, as Ukraine continues to go forward in developing its infrastructure, it's made a lot of investments today, but as it, goes forward and begins to integrate all of its transportation systems with the EU, okay, because the EU itself has something like a 300 billion euro long-term plan to integrate transportation networks, not just in Ukraine, but in Georgia and Armenia and Belarus. And so as that progresses, a number of very, very positive things grow out of that. First of all, on a sort of a legal political level, Ukraine is going to be given a very strong positive incentive to harmonize all of its laws and regulations and procedures and behaviors with those that are prevalent in the European Union. And that harmonization can only be a good thing. That means, taking a step back, Ukraine itself is going to have to find a way to change all of its laws and regulations and norms and procedures and behaviors concerning transportation. And in order to then be able to harmonize with the EU, okay? They can't come to the EU and say, we're going to harmonize our existing laws and regulations, because those are mostly unacceptable. They don't meet European standards. So that is a powerful political legal reform mechanism that's very positive. And it doesn't put folks over here who have wealth and power, it doesn't put them into a sort of a win-lose kind of zero-sum game type of response. When you come over to Ukraine and say, well, you have to fundamentally reform your judiciary, possibly replacing all the judges. Well, that's probably mostly true, but you're not going to get a very positive response, okay, from the government, and especially the judicial and prosecutorial services. They're not going to respond very well to that. But when you come with the kind of soft power that the EU is famous for, and you come at it, for example, in this context of infrastructure we're discussing, this allows economic development to go forward, because that's the whole purpose of infrastructure development. But it also then allows for a positive, let's grow the pie together engagement with the political powers, whoever they are, that are in the Ukrainian government. And it's the kind of thing that can then span different governments. We may get a new president over here. We may get another new president 5 years after that. I mean, Radas, like Congresses and parliaments, are changing composition all the time. So this is the kind of long-term strategy that I think we need to look at. I touched on the economic thing. What's great about infrastructure development is, when I say it democratizes, I mean that it creates vast array of business activities, and it opens up parts of the country to development that have either been left behind or have never been developed. So, and the more you broaden the Ukrainian economy, the more you increase the depth of the economy, the more you begin to stimulate, especially those mid-sized industries that are the backbone of pretty much any developed country, then you also, in a positive way, begin to slowly break the oligopolistic, monopolistic structure of the Ukrainian economy, which, you know, anyone who follows Ukraine knows is a big, big problem. And in that kind of development, you know, we just have to look, for example, at Portugal or Spain or Greece before they entered the EU, after they entered the EU, and a few decades of infrastructural development, and it had a wonderful effect politically, legally, but also economically. Last little comment, I guess, about infrastructure. You know, obviously a priority the government should have, whether it's doing it itself or with the EU, EBRD, European Investment Bank, World Bank, whoever, is to obviously extend a 21st century infrastructure network over into the east and the southeast of Ukraine to better anchor places like Mariupol, the ports of Mariupol and Berdyansk and the Azov Sea, which, you know, are slowly being strangled to death by Russia. And so infrastructure that can stimulate economic development there, tie them into the country is also good at a geostrategic level. But these plans are serious plans, not pie in the sky stuff. You know, I'll give you a couple quick examples. About 80 kilometers south of Kiev is a city called Belosirka. And there's a major investment going on there now to thoroughly redevelop the small regional airport into a cargo transportation hub, a logistics center. And that is going to stimulate a lot of secondary, tertiary development of a logistics nature around that kind of a transportation hub concept. So, and you're seeing this pretty much around the country when you look at what's being done, especially with ports. We have several clients that we work with in the Odessa port region, and they're exporters of grains and metallurgical products, and they are as they are expanding, they are sourcing their very sophisticated machinery, equipment, and all the processing, handling systems to receive and store and reload onto ships. All of that sophisticated process and equipment, they're sourcing it locally. It's being produced by Ukrainian companies. Yes, some is being imported, but most of it is being sourced locally. And again, that's the kind of secondary, tertiary, really serious secondary, tertiary development you get off of infrastructure. So number one advice that I would give if I was asked, and I'm not, but I will, is, you know, keep focused on infrastructure. It's long term. It's, shall we say, intergenerational in terms of who's in power, etc. So that would be number one. I would extend that also to certain key sectors, such as agriculture and energy. These agriculture, of course, is a big bright spot for Ukraine. But again, if you go back and look at what's happening with agriculture in Ukraine, it is almost entirely growth in the quantity of production and export of low value added crops, you know, corn, soy, wheat. Nothing wrong with that. But again, you know, there needs to be, you know, more than one leg to a three-legged stool. And one leg is, okay, let's just continue to expand the quantity of output of corn and wheat and soy and produce more and export more. But again, that's low value added. And it would behoove the government of Ukraine to prioritize the broadening and the deepening of the agribusiness sector, so that you begin to move up the value added chain. And again, that requires a lot of investment, sure. It also requires, some political negotiation with the EU, because bringing agribusiness products are often harder to export than raw material products. But again, that's a good thing. Ukraine has that potential. Remember, who goes to Davos? Who goes to Davos are the largest and most powerful corporations in the world. And the wealthiest individuals in the world. And, it has always been the case, going back to day one of Ukraine's independence, that if you are a very large, wealthy, powerful, multinational corporation, you can come to Ukraine and you can make certain kinds of investments and you can defend your interests, okay? But as you come down the scale, as you get off of the gigantic multinational level and start getting down into firms that are large, yes, okay, but they're not necessarily large enough to go toe to toe with corrupt oligarchic and political interests in Ukraine, whether it's regional or national. Now, I don't believe there is an increase in trust in general. Okay, the business risk of Ukraine is better and it continues to improve, but the business risk is still significant. And you better be big enough to be able to defend your interests over here. And again, there are some sectors of the economy which you just simply can't enter. Look, energy is a classic example. Okay, energy production, whether it's coal mines, power stations, electricity distribution, nuclear, it is totally, whether it's state, private, it's totally under the control, not only of Ukrainian interests, which is not in and of itself bad, but it's under the control of a very small number of Ukrainian interests. And so, in any country, inordinate economic power translates into inordinate and unfortunate political power. And so if you look at the energy sector, you can see that tariffs for the coal mining, tariffs for power generation, coal-fired power generation, they're quite adequate. But tariffs for the entities that distribute electricity are quite inadequate. They're barely able to break even. They have no capital budgets. They're deteriorating. They cannot attract the kind of investment domestically or internationally because they don't have the profitability. And why is that? Well, they don't have the proper tariff structure. Why is that? Well, because the political power when it comes to tariffs, those elements that control coal and power generation are more influential than those who control electricity distribution. And so foreign investment has a difficult time coming into energy. If you look at renewable energy, solar and wind, Ukraine has vast potential. There's been investment, it's expanding, but basically there's three people, okay? And I won't mention the names, but if I did mention the names, then you'd suddenly start thinking of American political scandals. There are three people who effectively own and control all of the solar and wind generating capacity in Ukraine, and so it's very, very hard to enter that industry. Ukraine has some of the highest green tariffs in the world. Okay, I don't know if people realize that. Well, it has some of the highest green tariffs in the world because the individuals who are taking the lead at developing renewable energy also have inordinate political influence, and you know that's helped them to get these high tariffs. That's fine, but you know, microeconomics says that if you have high returns, you should start getting a lot of entry into that market. Well, good luck trying to enter that particular segment of the market, wind and solar. You're going to run into lots of problems. So again, now if you're a huge company, you can probably penetrate that, but we need to get to a point in Ukraine someday where you don't have to be either a very large, wealthy, powerful corporation or the tiniest micro enterprise in order to do business and survive. We got to develop that empty middle over here. And, there's a million different kinds of policies that could be done. And there's lots of, reforms involving, shall we say, legal behavior that could be pursued. But that's something that needs to be followed, continued. By the way, everything that I'm mentioning is being worked on. I have to keep coming back to the point that this country is getting better. It's a better country this year than last year and better than the year before. One should never stop pushing, stop expecting more, regardless of what country you're living in, but not lose track of the fact that, oh, by the way, things are improving. Never fast enough and never enough, but so okay. So there's what I could say about energy. I'll come back to agriculture, actually, land reform, because it's the same situation. We all know who suffers from land reform. It's individual peoples and families, and these are not wealthy people. These are former employees, former, we'll say, participants in the state and collective agricultural economy of the Soviet Union, and they were allocated small amounts of land. Now, a moratorium that says you cannot sell agricultural land deprives this individual, this family, of the benefits of working their single most important family asset, which is the land that they own. They can't sell it, which means they can't sell it and take that money and invest it somewhere else, create a small business, or, whatever they want to do, which would be very good to stimulate the economy. They can't sell it to companies that would then consolidate and start competing with the established players. They're forced. They can't pledge it. Okay, they can't use the land as a pledge. All they can do is rent. But when the only thing you can do is rent, then all the economic power is on the side of those who are renting your land. And so, you'll see credible estimates that are, 30, 40, 70% below, rents being below the market value of rents that would obtain in a market where agricultural land could be sold. So the people who are losing in every dimension. Well, who's gaining? Well, who gains are major Ukrainian and multinational agricultural companies who are the ones who are renting the land and responsible for that production and that export. And so, they are not excited about the idea, and these are, again, I'm mentioning foreign companies, not just Ukrainian companies, big foreign companies. They are not excited about the idea of sales of agricultural land in Ukraine, because that will drive up their costs. They'll either have to buy that land, and they don't want that, or they'll have to pay higher rents, and they don't want that, because that eats into their profit margin. Or heaven forbid, they'll face competition, and they don't want that. So this is why you get you get sort of stuck, and we're not going anywhere with land reform. Again, it's a big structural thing. But again, the goal for any government in Ukraine should be, let's do whatever is possible to grow mid-sized businesses, develop the mid-sized economy, and that inevitably leads to the necessity for land reform in agriculture. Well, by the way, there's a little bit of good news there. The government did adopt a whole new strategy for privatization, but privatization still remains, after 25 years, a catastrophic failure. But there's degrees of failure, and they did change the strategy, and they are now selling assets, not equity, in small companies. So all these small scale companies and all these individual assets, a warehouse here, a building there, those are being sold, and they're being sold through an auction process. And the auction process is certainly not perfect, nothing is, but the auction process indisputably has reduced corruption. It's indisputably raised, I think, more money than would otherwise have been raised. But still, last year the government achieved 1.5% of its privatization revenues. It sets a target of like 17 billion. That's hundreds of millions of dollars, and it turns around and gets 1 or 2% realization. Well, that's a failure. And by the way, the problem with that is that if you put 17 billion hryvnias into your budget, and then you go to the IMF and say, look, here's the deficit. You need to finance that, and in reality, the deficit's a lot bigger than that, because and by the way, the IMF knows that you're not going to earn 17 billion hryvnias in privatization. You're going to earn 100 million. You earn 1 or 2% of that. Well, that just means that the Ukrainian government has a bigger deficit, and it has to immediately turn around and start, raising additional sources of domestic and international debt financing for the government. So, if somebody wanted to, twist my arm into very specific policies, I would say, how about a very specific policy to improve the reliability of your budgeting process? Okay, budgeting's always is a guess. It's always a forecast, but it doesn't make any sense to say, let's assume we're going to have 17 billion hryvnias that we know we're not going to have as government revenue. So the government, as part of the new privatization strategy, they decided to still sell equity of these large companies, and they put out a long list of all the really big companies that they want to privatize. And the way they're going to do this is they hold a tender, which I think is a mistake, to hire consultants who will then go out and in some rather ill-defined way, prepare the companies for privatization and help find investors. Hiring consultants through a tender process is not exactly, selling assets through a tender process, or buying, pencils through a tender process. But, hiring consultants through a tender process it doesn't seem to me to be the best way to go about that. And in fact, all of those tenders have failed. They've held tenders, they've selected winners, and then companies, I again won't mention name, but they're highly credible international companies, have filed suit against the Ukrainian government, claiming that there's various irregularities in the tender process. So again, privatization is just stuck. And I would just come back. And again, we know why it's stuck with the big companies. It's inertia. You know, the big state companies that are profitable, there's a lot of people, whether it's local political people or local economic agents. There's a lot of people who benefit from a large state enterprise that is profitable staying part of the state, and they're of course going to fight tooth and nail to keep it from being privatized. And then, you know, the dead dinosaurs that you're still trying to sell, nobody wants to buy them. You know, again, the classic example is this Odessa, well, it's Odessa chemical plant. It's actually called the Odessa portside plant, but it's a chemical plant in Odessa. And they've been trying to privatize that for forever. And they have both problems. They have those who are benefiting from the plant staying government owned, viciously fighting to maintain the status quo. And at the same time, no credible investor is interested in buying that because you have extremely large loans to, I'll mention this name, to Mr. Firtash. You know, who's been indicted in the United States. And now this raises some interesting issues. If we buy the equity of that company, we then have to pay off a large, perhaps questionable debt to someone who's, you know, under threat of extradition to America, and then we can get tied up in that politics. So you have a big mess always in the large enterprises. And again, I would just advise the government to do with the big enterprises what they're doing with the little enterprises. Put them into bankruptcy and just clean out the balance sheets. They're government owned. They can do this if they want to. Clean out the balance sheet and sell them as asset packages, and they would sell very quickly. But you know, that's simply not going to happen. The only truly disruptive actions are going to have to come out of the political sphere, because the number one disruptive action that has to occur is a breaking of this current rather sclerotic, oligopolistic, monopolistic economy that we have over here. And that can only be done through the political process. But, you know, again, you know, going back to our discussion about, you know, the development of agriculture, agribusiness, and the spin-offs, you know, like the Ukrainian companies producing, you know, world competitive machinery, equipment, processes for export terminals, and you know, the spin-offs that come with infrastructure development. Through time, you know, those begin to accumulate in terms of income and wealth and political influence, that, you know, through time, the current system, you know, will, I think, just kind of break of its own inertia. You know, I mean, every country kind of has this. The United States, we had a big problem in the so-called Gilded Age, late 19th, early 20th century, with a massive concentration of wealth and power in a few hands when it came to oil and railroads and banking. And it took a long time to sort that, to break that system. But ultimately, the disruptive driver was political. And so, you know, we're just going to have to wait on that. But we don't have to wait on you know, seeking the path of least resistance. Couple positive things to think about. You know, Ukraine needs to think about creating new industries and developing the new industries. Okay, we can't always just be talking about, you know, agriculture and okay. And the last time we talked, I was mentioning education and IT. And these are areas where you do have a path of least resistance. Look, Ukraine has become world recognized in its IT talent, and it's evolved. It started with sort of like a lot of back office sort of support, but it's moved now into real cutting edge IT. And you've got Ukrainian accelerator programs here, Ukrainian accelerator programs set up in Silicon Valley. So you've got that. This is the kind of sector where you don't have oligopolistic, monopolistic control because it's too new and it's intangible. Okay, steel, metallurgical companies and coal mines are rather tangible, but IT is intangible. And the government could take a very serious look at all of the enabling legislation and enabling regulations, everything from tax policy to improved protection of intellectual property, to continue to stimulate development in an industry where Ukraine has done itself very proud in terms of demonstrating its capabilities. Education is another one. Ukraine can and should, and again, it certainly can develop a world-class export industry for higher education. I can't make the point without a little shameless promotion. There is a private university with which, as a disclaimer, I'm a special advisor to the board, but they're private. They're internationally accredited. Germany, Canada, Britain, the US. Half of the student body, okay, are foreign students hailing from 41 countries. Now, this university, I got to say the name, Ukrainian American Concordia University. There's my plug. But we're not the only one. There's Catholic University in Lviv, which is superb. Okay, so the point being that this didn't just happen overnight. You go all the way back to the Soviet Union days, and Ukraine was always seen as a center of higher education. World-class higher education. Think Kiev Polytechnic Institute or the Lviv Polytechnic Institute. Or all the engineering schools that support, Antonov production. And so now that was a different system, and students came for political reasons, more government to government. But the point is, Ukraine has a reputation in the world for high quality education, and now you're getting students coming here, middle class students from Nigeria and India and Egypt and China and places, who are coming and to get education, bachelor's, master's in economics and in business. And there's no reason this can't be expanded into other scientific fields. So I would recommend, and I constantly do recommend to the government, take a look at all the enabling legislation, all the regulations, everything you can do to stimulate the private sector growth in higher education. Okay, because again, we talk about privatization, and it's always like, well, this steel mill used to be owned by the government. Now we're going to privatize it personal hand. Well, education was 100% owned by the government under the old administrative economy, under the Soviet Union. And we need to now privatize education. Some of it, not all of it, but certainly at the level of higher education, because Ukraine has the potential, given and seriously, given its geographic location. Okay, so it's the cost is less. The geographic location is closer if you're living in Egypt or India or China, other high population countries. Kiev, or for that matter, Lviv or Odessa, are lovely cities. They're safe. The cost of living is low, and the human capital is still here. Now, Ukraine has a serious problem with a brain drain. But I can't think of any better way to stop a brain drain than to develop your higher education industry into a multi-billion-dollar export sector. That will not only keep young, intelligent, entrepreneurial-minded people here who care about education or tech, but it'll not only keep them here, it'll start attracting others to come back. And last little point, we're in the world of technology, right? And everybody talks about fintech, but there's also something called ed tech. And Ukraine will always have a minuscule financial industry, which doesn't mean it can't develop good fintech products. It does, and it is. But it can also develop ed tech products all the way into sophisticated AI combined with its human capital in education. So these things are complementary. To put an end to my rambling, look, regardless of what government takes over, they need, like all governments need, is to take at least a 10, 20, 30-year time frame and start thinking about, where do we want to, what entire industries do we want to develop? IT, education, agriculture, renewable energy. Okay, and then start creating the thousands of policies necessary and the tens of thousands of legislative regulatory tweaks necessary to actually implement and go for that. So there's a difference between being critical because you have a positive opinion and a true belief in that which you're being critical of, whether it's a teenage kid or it's any country in the world. You can be critical in a positive way because you care and you believe, or you can just be critical in kind of a cynical and destructive way. And we have to be so careful not to fall into the trap of just being critical and cynical when we look at Ukraine and all of its many problems, okay? Because first of all, we have to remember Ukraine's problems are problems with the government. There's, my expression, which I use all the time, is that Ukraine is not a poor country, it's a poorly managed country. And so if all we do is concentrate on the government and the corruption, and I could name other countries where if all you did is concentrate on the government sector, you'd have a pretty negative opinion. But when you really stand back and look at this fabulously wealthy country and a super high quality population, I don't see how you can't be, yes, critical and yes, kind of frustrated, but from the point of view of, well, I really believe in these people, and I believe in this country. And after all, I'm heavily invested here, and I'm not a big multinational corporation that can defend myself. So I have to have some true confidence in where the country's going, or I wouldn't be able to survive over here. So that's and so yeah, let's talk some more, because there's just no reason to approach life in anything but a positive way. And I think if you'll notice, some of my critical comments are pretty critical. Okay, I'm not some starry-eyed, I'm a pretty hard-nosed, cynical guy, but again, life is not binary. It's not bad, good. It's everything's a gray area. We just, for example, created a new joint master's degree program with Rutgers University. Rutgers is a top 25 U.S. university. They're top 100 in the world by science and innovation. And yet they've partnered up with us for a master's in global agribusiness program in Kiev. And they did that because, again, we have the international independent accreditation. We are accredited by Germany. There is no hanky-panky in the educational sector of Germany. We met all of the ethical and academic standards that are very high to get German accreditation. And we therefore have British accreditation and Canadian accreditation, American accreditation. I mean, if we can do it, many other institutions can do it. And again, that's a great way to retain talent. But the reason that you know, please put in as much of my pontificating on education for everybody to see that you care to, because look, just think about this. Everybody will say, oh my God, Ukraine is suffering from a brain drain. Well, okay, except then why is it that my university, okay, and we're small, okay, but why is it that my small university has students from 41 countries, half of our student body studying for bachelor's and master's degrees? You know, when you talk about a brain drain, it sounds like, well, I guess Ukraine's just getting dumber by the day. No, we're not. We're getting more and more foreign students by the day. We have foreign students who come from Japan and come from South Korea, who are in possession of some of the highest quality universities in the world. Why are they coming to Kiev? Cost, convenience, safety, especially cost, but also because they know that Kiev is a lovely city with an remarkably low crime rate and full of nice people that don't discriminate against you. And so again, if we can do it, it can. We've what I've tried to do with this school, again, pro bono, but what I've tried to do is demonstrate a model that works, demonstrate a template, and then say to this government or anybody else, hey, you know, here's an industry that is ripe for the development. You know, so anyway, so there you go. All right, take care.